This is work with Xavier and Yunsi. There's another paper related to this coming up tomorrow. I will mention that. But first of all, motivation. The important point is you're using all sorts of data, right? And you want that data to be accurate. You want it to be, yeah. Data should be accurate. So it's the ADS-B data that you're getting from the feeders, and we've talked about this at previous symposiums. But it's also the metadata on the aircraft and everything. Everything should be accurate, right? And so in a research project, can't move.
Seems to be locked. This doesn't work.
Yeah, no, perfect, thanks. In a research project, we found some issues that we were quite familiar with, because I've been standing here, not in Delft, but at the symposium last year, some years ago, 17, 16, every time talking about, okay, we're tracking aircraft, there's some implications for, privacy, we can track aircraft. If you're military, if you're government, as we are, if you're a private aircraft owner, if you're a corporate aircraft owner, and aircraft tracking has implications, right? People can follow your tracks, and that's very good for research, but from a security and privacy perspective, there are also implications for this. People can use this to find information about you. We've looked at mergers and acquisitions that could be tracked by aircraft, right? We've just followed governments, we've followed oligarchs. All that has been done in research by us already years ago. And we've been preaching here that this is a possibility and that's relevant. Like this is an example for, the governments in Europe. And this was an example where you really could track everything down to the wire of mergers and acquisitions deals some years ago. This case, Johnson & Johnson buying somebody in Basel. And you see all the times they ended up on Basel on the runway just before news of acquisitions. And 2022, suddenly, this became a topic. Like we've been droning on about years, right? Me mainly, but somehow in 2022, everything exploded everywhere, right? This is probably a good picture, like everything fitting together. So Elon Musk was tracked using OpenSky data, and there was a Twitter account, and basically created a bot by some first-year undergraduate student. It's not, everybody here knows how to do this, right? You have an OpenSky API, you can have a Twitter bot, you can automate this. This is not rocket science, but somehow, surprisingly, everyone was surprised. It exploded, and exploded all over the news, globally. If you found in any language, people are tracking Elon Musk's plane, right? Of course, then you have a Streisand effect when he paid him to stop, or tried to pay him to stop, offered him some money. He made that public, and then as it goes, right, it became even more publicity, exactly what you don't want. It went on, more bots, more OpenSky, and other web tracker data, actually, for celebrity jets. Like there was also an attempt tracking jets in Ukraine, but there are no jets in Ukraine. But celebrities use private jets. And as we've heard, there will be this talk tomorrow. It's not good for the climate, some people realized this year. We actually had here at Amsterdam just a protest this week. People see, okay, it's a thing, and they didn't really know about it before, apparently, and now you have bots on Twitter, and suddenly everybody knows, right? So I think Kylie Jenner and Drake and other US people somehow had to say, no, it's not as bad. I'm not flying on these flights. These are empty flights, just repositioning, because that's better for the environment if I'm not on it, right? Another one was in France, Bernard Arnault, apparently the third richest man in the world, was also flying a lot. So there was an Instagram bot and a Twitter bot, and it got a ton of coverage in France, at least, as Xavier assures me. And people just also tweet, yeah, directly how much carbon dioxide has been used just by these flies from a certain aircraft, in this case, yeah, the owner of Louis Vuitton. That was kind of the start of this research paper that's Yunsi will be talking about tomorrow, right? Using the OpenAP model, calculating the climate impact of private jet aircraft. But then Xavier said, oh, there's something weird with this one jet. I have this transponder number, but I can't find it in your aircraft database. This one. And it has some weird data. Like, it's the data in the database, as you can see here, was an Air France aircraft, A321 Neo, right? Of course, Air France has these aircraft, but not with that transponder ID. And that particular registration also doesn't exist. It also doesn't belong to Air France, right? And say, okay, why? What's happening here? We have to look into our database, which is everything is crowdsourced, and see what's going on. Because, as you can see, actually in our data, if you look for call signs and everything, it's not an Air France aircraft. This was just another Louis Vuitton aircraft that we were looking for, right? Sorry?
The original one.
Yeah, the original one. Doesn't exist anymore, I think. I think the last flight's here, right, in July. So, because of all this publicity, some of these aircraft have vanished also from the Instagram bots. So I said, okay, what's happening here? Let's look at it. Is there some bigger conspiracy going on in our OpenSky aircraft database? Professionally, this whole thing is called Astroturfing, right? So if you look at Google Astroturfing, there's an Oxford Language Dictionary entry, and it says, okay, Astroturfing is a deceptive practice of presenting an orchestrated marketing PR campaign in the guise of unsolicited comments from members of the public. So essentially, instead of being like open up front, if you're a corporation or a government or anything, saying, okay, I want this particular data to be changed, you pretend to be some member of the public, editing Wikipedia or something on your own article, not on your own name, which is not allowed, but somebody else will do it for you, and you give the impression that, okay, this is totally normal and not deceptive. And that's something that happened in our aircraft database. We introduced this around 5 years ago. It has seen more and more uptake. I've heard a lot of people are using this because there are not so many, again, other open databases available with aircraft data. It's not perfect, but at least it has a lot of entries. You see over 500,000 aircraft here. At some point we realized we also want the data to be kind of stored over time, so we started doing monthly snapshots so you can see kind of what happens over time, right? If you're not aware, there are the links and you can go check it out. If you look a little bit more in depth here, we have 24 fields defined per aircraft. The primary key is the ICAO transponder ID because, as we know, that's quite reliable for tracking and hard to change. 22 of these fields are editable by users. If you're registered and logged into OpenSky, you can go and edit any aircraft in principle. So this is just a random Swiss aircraft here as an example. If you do that, looks like this. Again, you can't change the mode S hex code, but everything else you can, in principle, edit. It's not as easy as that. You can't trivially vandalize it because most of our data actually comes from verified online sources, FAA, other civil aviation authorities, and is, as far as possible, is also updated from these sources. And you cannot write over these verified data sources. That's the goal, right? So it's okay, this is the gold standard of data. Our users cannot edit this. But still, a lot of countries don't offer that, right? So in Europe, in particular, like Germany, France, a lot of aircraft, and you cannot get that sort of data. There are other online sources, also crowdsourced, and people have been collecting it for years, like the legendary basestation.sqb files, and we've all been integrating this, right? So, of course, there's a lot of noise over time, but it's as good as it gets from our perspective. And we have the users, and they've edited over 9,000 aircraft in those few years. This year was quite busy, like has seen definitely some uptake. Over 2,000 aircraft have been touched this year by our users. And the problem is, as I've mentioned and alluded, there was some vandalism, some malicious database editing going on. We have some algorithms in the background that are able to check for conflicts, right? Somebody entering data conflicting with other user data or conflicting with, let's say, FAA data. And this was flagged in 973 cases where we had some of these conflicts between verified sources and user edits. That's, well, some of the over 9,000, roughly 10%. We looked at really all of these manually. Okay, is there something malicious going on here? Because in the end, that's not something you can easily do by algorithm. And we found 170 or 1.85% of all the edits that we say, okay, these are fishy. Like we can say, this is very odd. Somebody is really trying to suppress the owner, trying to delete the registration or even all data somehow here, right? This is an example. Somebody, and this, if I'm not mistaken, is one of Elon Musk's jets, was trying to delete basically all the user data some point in July, and the original FAA data on this jet was from April, right? So there was no way they could overwrite it. But they tried to kind of get rid of all this identifying data. Again, the transponder ID cannot be edited. It never made it to our database, so that's good, but it's very interesting that people have been doing this. Looking at what is being targeted and who's doing it. So most of these that we could identify were from the US, Australia, UK, Canada, and Switzerland. It's been who's who of corporations. I've shown some examples now. Musk and Louis Vuitton, but also a lot of sanctioned Russian oligarchs and other, well, interesting aircraft that people are actually interested in tracking, right? Overall, aircraft types. Most are business, corporate aircraft. Looking at the aircraft types, some are smaller private aircraft. So we had some cases where you really have, a private owner with a small Cessna. They don't want to be tracked, but they might be in a public aircraft database or something. So I think that's morally much more interesting and like legitimate cases here. Some governments, emergency service, military could all be identified here. Second thing that we thought about, besides this astroturfing attempt in the database, some people are a little bit more open. They're not transparent against the world, but they're at least, talking to us and as OpenSky, and you get requests saying, okay, can we not have our data, not have our aircraft in your data, right? And obviously that puts OpenSky in a difficult position because the data integrity is like the most important thing we have. If you do collision avoidance, climate change research, whatever, and there are some aircraft missing, I mean, all your conclusions will be wrong. So fundamentally, it's not something we can do, like just as a preface. It has been controversial across the whole kind of spectrum of aircraft tracking, web tracking, for a long time now, actually. The FAA in the US has a program that keeps changing its names. At the moment, it's called the Limiting Aircraft Data Displayed Program. And basically, you request the FAA, you say, okay, please don't distribute our data to other people. But that's only for people who use directly the FAA data, and that might apply to some web trackers. It does not apply to OpenSky, where it's all purely crowdsourced from end users. And be that as it may, either way, from a privacy perspective, as a security researcher, this is all futile security through obscurity. There are other web trackers tracking it anyway, and all of you can just use your own ADS-B receivers, and you have the same data, right? The data is not going away. The aircraft are broadcasting this data, and just because you don't display it on some web page doesn't make the data go away. Anybody with the really minimum of resources and motivation will still be able to track this data, and that is what's happening. You can look into some of the older related research. As I've said, we've been looking at this for a long time. This is just, the FAA webpage, and they're clarifying, okay, if you're a vendor, if you're getting our data, then for all the data you have, you cannot show these aircraft on this list, right? And this list, effectively is public. Either you can identify it, you compare a blocked source with a non-blocked source, and the difference is basically all the aircraft on the list, or you do a freedom of information request to the FAA, and you will also get the list. People have done this. It's all quite well known, actually. Either way, we're getting requests, and people still think it's a valid approach to security. Over the past 5 years, in our database, we found 73 people who had a request and said, okay, how do we block our data? We looked at it after cleaning. Some are just general requests. Can we do it? Is there a process? Some are duplicate messages. We were left with 39 requests where people really wanted concrete aircraft to be taken out of circulation. Often you have more than one aircraft, charter services, big governments. So overall we had 92 tail numbers in a list here. Background, most of them are government authorities. Different countries, you can talk about, legitimacy, not really my job, but there's definitely a debate to be had. Are they accountable to anybody, to their citizens, right? Should they be able to be tracked? Many are privately owned, very wealthy individuals in all cases here. Corporations and charter services also running, basically the same large aircraft for some individuals where it's hard to identify. Backgrounds, vast majority came from basically one request in Saudi Arabian government. And I've actually just heard from Xavi this morning that they were trying to push a block on the ICAO level. Let's see how that goes. I'm not convinced, but there's more. I think you can see the countries, US, Germany up front, but a lot of different countries. Some fun facts on what we found, all of this. Blocking requests we've gotten since 2017. The Astroturfing attempts we found basically since 2019. Interesting case was like a big oil companies who wanted to be blocked after some news reports that, you can use this for big merger signals basically. But you get even a better signal if you get such a request before, right? So you knew they're doing something that is interesting just by sending a request to, I guess, not only us, but to probably other web trackers elsewhere. Really nice. We didn't make any money on it. South American government requests with this code here, right? They're obviously, again, still in the data, but I would be interested in what they want to contribute to the organization. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of space here, of course, for kind of non-technical work. You can think about ethics, you can think about privacy, international law. Who are aircraft owners accountable to? People say there's a climate emergency. Is it still acceptable to come with your private jets, fly them around, right? So that accountability of these Twitter bots, I mean, you cannot say they haven't been successful. They've created a lot of interest, a lot of public outcry sometimes, and things may be changing because of that. So it's not all black and white. To conclude, we have some impact certainly. I would argue from our research, and you should read the paper if you're interested, that the data integrity is fine. You cannot override any verify legitimate data, and that's by far the most. There are some edge cases here and there. So if you're interested for your research in some specific high-profile aircraft, you should probably always double-check with several sources. And any of the edge cases, they were just a handful at the end of the day. So with all the noise that is in that database anyway, just because data from many countries will be outdated over time, it's a very small fraction, this problem. Sometimes the effects are counterintuitive, right? So if you offer money to somebody not to show your aircraft, you might start like an investigation like this one, or you might be featured specifically in like climate research. You might get your own Twitter bots. This will all happen. If you send requests, that might again negatively impact your operational security, like in the case of the big oil company, right? You might give away more than you actually would if you were just flying normally and hiding away in all these millions of aircraft flying every year, right? So that might be a much harder signal to find sometimes. We looked very briefly at the climate impact also of the aircraft that we found implicated both in the astroturfing and the requests. That's all in the paper, and on the methodology, I would suggest you check Jonsi's talk tomorrow morning. What have we learned? Again, I will probably be saying this for many years to come. There is still no privacy in the air. Your best shot is you charter some sort of aircraft that you share with somebody else, so at least then people don't know it's you flying, right? It's a technical reality that needs to be changed also with a technical solution somehow. The FAA has tried and failed several times. We know some people are unhappy about it, mostly rich people because they're affected, governments. So everything we found, some are valid reasons: operational security, business secrets. Climate guilt, well, depending on how you look at it, but we've seen sanction-busting aircraft, right? This year with Ukraine war, tax evasion, corruption, all this is also implicated in these aircraft trying to not be tracked. These people, maybe not them directly, we have at least some indication that there might be companies, like the top account did kind of 76 of the 170 suspicious edits we found, right? And it was over time. So maybe there's a company, somebody offering services trying to get your data off the web. But I don't think that's successful, as I've hopefully argued properly. And finally, as I said, I hope the scientific data is safe. This whole approach is very interesting, but largely ineffective. Could be some more countermeasures. We could, for example, make the logs open as you would have in Wikipedia, right? So then you can check for every aircraft yourself. What's the edit history? I think that would be a nice feature. You could also have more active moderation, like not just a handful of OpenSky back-end access guys looking at this, but maybe the community, just like Wikipedia moderators, also look at kind of edits and quickly detect what's happening. Any questions? Email, or maybe if I have time, still here. Thank you.